Nowhere to Call Home by Cynthia DeFelice, Chapter 12. As Frankie and Stewpot made their way back to the railroad yard, Frankie asked, "Did Blink ever tell you what happened to his eye?" "Yeah," answered Stewpot. "He was riding a freight one time, can't remember where, sitting on top of the car, 'cause the weather was nice. Anyway, a hot cinder from the engine came flying back and hit him square in the eye." Frankie flinched, imagining it. "What about Al's leg?" she asked. "I heard he was flipping a train and fell under the wheels," Stewpot said. "You mean he tried to jump on while the train was moving?" "Yep," said Stewpot. "Us bows do it all the time." Frankie was quiet, thinking about Blink and Pegleg Al. Stewpot looked at her and seemed to read her mind. "Aw, don't worry, kid," he said with a laugh. "Look at me. I still got all my parts right. I'm in swell shape." "I guess," Frankie said, "except for that cold." "That ain't nothing," Stewpot said. "Come on, let's go to the bakery and see if they got any day-olds they feel like giving away." As they walked the streets, Stewpot gave Frankie advice about asking for food. "Almost any bakery'll give you day-olds if they got 'em, but the best time to ask is when they're closing up and got stuff left over they didn't sell, see? Now this morning they might still have the stuff, or they could have thrown it out." In response to Stewpot's request for anything you was going to throw out anyhow, the baker gave them some rolls, donuts, and a loaf of bread. When Stewpot offered to wash the windows in return, the man in the bakery shook his head. "To tell you the truth, I wish I could give you more," he said sadly. "I've got a boy about your age who took off too. Had a buddy who talked him into it. I hope somebody's feeding him." He handed the bag to Frankie. "Thank you, sir," she said. "I'm sure your boy is fine, wherever he is." "I hope you're right, Sonny," said the baker. "I hope you're right." Outside, Frankie opened the bag, and the smell made her aware that she was hungry again. She handed a donut to Stewpot and took a huge bite of one herself. "Soft," said Stewpot with his mouth full. "Don't even have to dunk 'em." Frankie had finished her first donut and was reaching for a second when Stewpot said, "Take it easy there, Blue. We're going to be on the train a while. Gotta make the grub last." Frankie quickly dropped the donut back into the bag, feeling ashamed and still hungry. "What do you say we stop at this butcher shop? If we can get a ring of bologna or something, we'll be all set." The butcher, however, did not share the bakery man's sympathetic feelings. "Get out of here, you lousy bums!" he shouted, waving his large knife, his face flushing with anger over his bloody-fronted white apron. "And tell your crummy friends, no handouts at Schumacher's." Frankie turned quickly to leave. She knew her face was as red as Schumacher's, red with embarrassment and anger. "He had no right to call us that," she said. "He didn't even give us a chance to say we'd work for his crummy bologna. I wouldn't eat it if he got on his knees and begged." Stewpot was looking at her with amusement and a glimmer of admiration. "Pipe down there, Blue," he said. "Better get used to being called a bum." "Why should I?" said Frankie indignantly. "That guy there? There's lots like him." "Well, they ought to watch what they say," muttered Frankie. "What they say don't matter none, as long as you know what you are and what you ain't. It's when you start believing 'em, you're in trouble. Then you start hoisting the booze, and before you know it, you're a bum for real. I seen it happen to a lot of guys." Frankie was still fuming about the butcher. How would he like being out of work? Suddenly, she thought about Junius, Mary, Bridget, Mrs. Bailey, and Gordon. She had to think a moment. Oh no, it was Friday, the day Mr. Fletcher had told the servants they had to be out of the house. She remembered Mrs. Bailey's puffy face and red-rimmed eyes, and the panic and shock on the servants' faces when Mr. Fletcher made his pronouncement. She heard the echo of Bridget's wail, and of Mrs. Bailey's question, "But where will we go, sir?" At the time, Frances had been so caught up in her own misery that she hadn't given the plight of the servants much thought. She turned to Stewpot and said, "People don't ask to lose their jobs and get thrown out on the street." "Hey, Blue," said Stewpot, "you're right, but it ain't worth getting riled about. We gotta see if we can find us some more grub before we head for the yard." Frankie looked at Stewpot's matter-of-fact expression and tried to swallow her anger. The butcher and Cleveland Fletcher had both shown the same indifference to people who couldn't find work. Guiltily, she realized that all she had done was complain about having to go to Chicago. She hadn't said even a word of condolence to the servants. What would become of them? She thought about the hobos who had come to her house and visited with Junius. She had never been aware of them. Had Father, she wondered? Probably not. She felt sure Junius had fed them. Would Father have approved, or would he have said they were bums and turned them away? The questions made her feel uncomfortable. She was afraid she knew the answers. She and Stewpot stopped at a small corner grocery, where the owner said she'd give them some cheese if they swept the floor and moved some heavy boxes in the stockroom. Back out on the street, they unwrapped the cheese and saw that it was moldy around the edges, but that didn't bother Stewpot. "We'll cut off the green stuff, and she'll be fine," he said cheerfully. "Now I got one more stop to make, and then we gotta haul tail to the yard," he added suddenly. "You got a knife?" "No," answered Frankie. Too bad, said Stewpot. A bone needs a knife. I have a little bit of money, though, Frankie said eagerly. How much does a knife cost? You, Frankie Blue, are just full of surprises. Where'd you get your hands on money? Steal it from home before you left? Frankie thought about that. I guess I did, she said finally. Well, how much you got? About $50, Frankie said. Stewpot's jaw dropped. He gave Frankie a long gaze, then whistled. That's mighty big money, Frankie. You know you're lucky Omaha Red didn't make off with it. I know, said Frankie. You better watch your back walking around with that dough like that. Where are you keeping it? In my pocket. Well, put it in your shoe and don't tell nobody else you got it. Okay, said Frankie humbly. Stewpot waited while she untied her shoe, folded the bills, and placed them along with the coins in the shoe. How? Stewpot shook his head. Never mind. You got more than enough for a knife, that's for sure. And I know just where you can get one. Come on. He led Frankie for several blocks to a less prosperous section of town. They went into a shabby little shop that was full of merchandise of all kinds, jumbled together, in piles so high that at first Frankie didn't see the tiny man with the skinny mustache perched behind the counter on a stool. You got any pocket knives? Stewpot asked him. Sure do, answered the man. He smiled without warmth. You got any money? Sure do, answered Stewpot with a nod in Frankie's direction. Leastways, he does. What did you have in mind? The man asked, reaching beneath a display case and pulling out a tray. Well, Frankie stopped, having no idea what she had in mind. Like this here, said Stewpot, reaching into his pocket and taking out his knife. One that folds and closes up, see, like this. Not too big, but with a strong blade. The man set the tray down on the counter so Frankie and Stewpot could look. There were several knives along, with watches, pieces of jewelry, odd-looking coins, medals, and eyeglasses. None of the items Frankie noticed was new. She reached for a knife about the size and shape of Stewpot's, fit her fingernail into the little slot on the blade, and opened it. The blade was shiny and looked sharp. Stewpot reached out and ran his finger along it. Nodding with approval, Frankie rubbed the handle. It was beautiful, she thought, smooth and milky white. Mother of pearl, the man said proudly, as if he'd made the knife himself. How much? Frankie asked. $2, the man answered. Frankie reached down to untie her shoe and get the money. But to her surprise, Stewpot said scornfully, Highway robbery, that's what that is. Come on, Blue, let's go. Frankie stood astonished as Stewpot turned and began to walk away. He was almost out the door, and Frankie was about to follow him, when the man said, All right, $1. Stewpot turned around. 25 cents, he said. 75. No deal. 50. 25 or nothing, replied Stewpot, and I'm only offering that much 'cause of that fancy handle. The man sighed deeply. You drive a hard bargain, kid, he said, shaking his head. All right, you can have it for 25 cents. Not a penny less, though, he added. 25 it is, said Stewpot happily. Pay the man, Frankie, and let's get going. Out on the street again, Frankie held her knife in her palm and admired it. I never saw a store where things were old and used like that, and where you tell the man what you want to pay instead of him telling you. Ain't you never been in a pawn shop? Asked Stewpot. Frankie shook her head. Folks who need money go there with things they figure they can do without, and the guy pays them for their stuff. Then he tries to sell it to somebody else. Or maybe the person who pawned it in the first place will come back when he's got some dough and buy his own stuff back. Frankie thought about that. What if you return to buy your stuff back and somebody else already bought it? Stewpot shrugged. That's your tough luck. Frankie ran her hands over the smooth mother-of-pearl handle of the knife in her pocket, hoping that whoever had pawned it didn't care much about it and wouldn't come back to find it gone. She didn't say anything to Stewpot, though. He might think that was a sissy thing to think. Instead, she said, I was about to pay him $2. Stewpot stopped walking and poked his finger at Frankie's chest for emphasis. You never give a pawnbroker what he asks for right off. He'll try to get you to pay 5 times what something's worth. You just keep bargaining till he won't go no lower. How did you learn that? Frankie asked. It's just the way it is, Stewpot answered. Frankie nodded, silently thanking her lucky stars for the good fortune of joining up with Stewpot. She wished she could do something to pay him back for everything he had done for her. Hey, she said. I know what. You take $1.75. If it wasn't for you, I wouldn't have it any more anyway. You're the one who bargained for it. Nah, said Stewpot. Keep it. Take it, said Frankie. Please. I said keep it, Stewpot said gruffly, and he stuffed his hands in his pockets and began to walk. Frankie stood for a moment watching him go, realizing that she had offended him, and afraid that he wanted nothing more to do with her. She ran to catch up. Stewpot, she began, but her voice came out high-pitched and pleading, sounding too much like a girl's. She fell into step beside him and didn't say anything. Stewpot broke the uneasy silence. Look, Blue, you're still pretty green. If something happens to me and you get in a jam, you're going to need that dough. That's all I'm saying. But nothing is going to happen to you, Frankie exclaimed, finding herself terrified at the thought. Course not. I'm just saying, hang on to your dough and watch your back. Frankie nodded to show she understood. Then to change the subject, she asked, So what's this other stop you want to make before we catch the train? Oh yeah, said Stewpot, his face brightening. It's right up here. You'll see. Frankie breathed a silent sigh of relief and followed him to the door of a small shop. The sign read A.L. Wells Tobacconist. In smaller letters, there were the words cigars, cigarettes, tobacco, pipes, and accessories. Puzzled, Frankie followed Stewpot into the shop. She knew he liked to smoke when he could get one, but she didn't think he had money to buy cigarettes or tobacco. Good morning, Mr. Wells, Stewpot called out as they entered the dimly lit store, which was filled with the rich, sweet smell of many kinds of tobacco. You got any empties for me? Well, it's been a while, young man. And yes, I've saved a few for you. Frankie watched as the short, stout shopkeeper disappeared into the back room. He continued speaking, his voice sounding muffled and distant. Some other, travelers have come in asking, but I told them no. These boxes are promised. He reappeared carrying a stack of 5 wooden cigar boxes, which he set down on the countertop. Hot diggity dog, Stewpot declared. That's mighty nice of you, Mr. Wells. Now how the heck am I going to carry 'em all? Mr. Wells glanced at Frankie. She introduced herself. I'm Frankie Blue, and I'm pleased to meet you, sir. The tobacconist returned her smile and said, Likewise, Mr. Blue. The name Mr. Blue startled her at first. Then she smiled at the sound of it. Turning to Stewpot, she said, I can probably fit 3 in my bag. She leaned down and opened the bag, rearranging her possessions so that she was able to stuff 3 of the boxes inside. There was more room, she thought ruefully, since the heist. She supposed she could throw out her old clothes. At some point when Stewpot wasn't watching, she would. After all, what did Frankie Blue need a blouse and pinafore and stockings for? There, she said to Stewpot. Now you can roll up the other 2 boxes in your bundle. No problem, said Stewpot happily, as he did exactly that. He hoisted his bundle by the strap and tossed it over his shoulder. Thanks, Mr. Wells, he said. Now what have you got for me to do? Got any deliveries? No, said Mr. Wells. Take the boxes and go, young man. Where are you fellas headed? Frankie Blue here's got a hankering to head west, answered Stewpot. Well, mind you be careful, said Mr. Wells. People have been raising a fuss about vagrants lately, and the police are under pressure to crack down and make arrests. We'll be careful, Stewpot reassured him. He turned to leave. Thanks for the boxes, Mr. Wells. And for the advice, added Frankie. Goodbye, fellas, said Mr. Wells, as they walked through the big wooden door. He called after them, And good luck to you both. Come on, Stewpot said. We gotta hurry, but don't run. Just walk real casual-like till we get out of town so we don't attract any attention. Okay, said Frankie, trying her best to imitate Stewpot's nonchalant stroll. I give. What are the boxes for? Stewpot smiled mysteriously. You'll find out, he said, as soon as we get settled in a boxcar headed west.